My favorite painting in the world hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It's a 10-foot wide canvas by Jules Bastien Lepage that depicts Joan of Arc at age 13 as she's standing in her parents' garden. Faintly in the painting, you can see the images of the three French saints whom she believed spoke to her. There's a look of intensity and mild shock on the child's face as she is instructed by these disembodied voices to inspire a rebellion in France against British rule, the 100 Years' War. I've kept a print of this painting over my desk where I write my sermons for the last 25 years. Her look of determination, sacrifice, and zeal inspire me. However, it should also be noted that Joan of Arc was certainly schizophrenic, or at least suffered from dementia. So if some part of that influences sermons you've heard, you understand that along with a certain religious fervor and intensity, there's always a certain likelihood of insanity. The voices she heard were not really the voices of long-dead French saints. The voices came from inside of Joan's own skull. Still, it would be a mistake to write off people like Joan of Arc as having been simply schizophrenic. She wasn't simply insane. She was also brave. She also had a great and courageous faith. She was inspired, and she managed to inspire a nation, and she courageously went to her death defending the voices that both she and her accusers should have known were not real. And I suspect that many of the French who followed her into battle didn't really believe the stories either, but they had sort of heard the voices in their own hearts that the French did not want to be ruled by the British. Our evening news is often marred with images of religious fanaticism, wars, beheadings, suicide bombers representing a jihadist worldview. Like Joan of Arc, in part inspired by deranged faith, and in part fighting for liberation from Western dominance, or for individual, tribal, or clan power and dominance, the way that the human race always has. We can admire strong faith. We value courage. We sympathize with the goals of self-determination and freedom from foreign oppression. But as religious people, I think we need to take a really sober look at certainty. Fundamentalism demands a certain fealty to an absolute set of beliefs, that we are right, and anyone who disagrees with us is wrong. Fundamentalism gives people a false confidence that they possess absolute truth about things which humans can never know. It gives people confidence about things around which they should always have humility. Even Muhammad's first vision, his reaction to it was to doubt it, to come back and tell his wife, what happened to me could not really have happened. Muslim fundamentalists never want this part of the story of Muhammad's history to be repeated. But after his first religious vision, which he had while he was in isolation in a cave on a mountain, he assumed that he had been possessed by a demon. And in fact, tradition in that part of the world was that you sent your child at a very early age out to live with the Bedouins in the wilderness. And at one point, the family that was raising Muhammad brought him back to his mother and told them that they thought he was demon-possessed. So that mark had been on him from early childhood. So he suspected even himself. In that culture, they talked about evil jinn, which were like evil genies, not so much demons, but something like the genie in the bottle that turned out to be a bad guy. Again, you might suspect some sort of dementia when anyone says they hear voices and have visions. But among religious enthusiasts, You might have expected Muhammad to come running down the mountain shouting hallelujah that he had been chosen to have these visions, chosen to be the last and the greatest of all of God's prophets, full of enthusiasm and euphoric about having actually met an angel. But in his own account, he was struck with self-doubt, so much so that he decided that he should kill himself, that it would be the only way that he could get rid of the evil jinn that had taken over his mind. His wife, out of concern for him, sent him to stay with one of her cousins, who was an Ebionite. The Ebionites were Jewish Christians, a kind of religion that existed in the 5th century, people who believed that Jesus was a prophet but not divine. They rejected the letters of Paul. They kept Jewish customs. And it was this cousin, Waraka, who told Muhammad that his vision had come to him through the archangel Gabriel. Muhammad had not come up with that on his own. She taught him about what the Ebionites' view of biblical narratives and beliefs, much of which then appeared in the Quran. Much of the material, the recounting of Jewish biblical stories and early Christian stories, the version that shows up in the Quran, originated in the Ebionite tradition. Now, I don't say any of this to be disrespectful, though I'm certain that saying just what I've just said would put me in some physical danger if I were saying it in the wrong country. But I offer these observations as a corrective, not as a rejection. History museums are full of the artifacts of dead religions related to gods whose names are no longer remembered. Any religion that is too dogmatic, that's too rigid, that's too certain of its own absolutes, so much so that it cannot bear questioning, doubts, or changes in direction, is destined to end up as a display in a history museum. Fundamentalism will not save Islam, it will kill it. Fundamentalism, literalism, conservatism will not save Christianity. It will instead make it so irrelevant, so out of touch with reality, that even Christianity will take its place alongside other outdated superstitions and magical thinking. The realities of the universe and of God are simply too big for any one religion and certainly cannot be controlled through dogma or creeds. God doesn't recite creeds. As Gandhi said, God is not a Muslim, Hindu, Christian, or Jew. God has no religion. Now, I'm not saying that all religions are the same, because they are not. I will, however, say that there is no right religion, and that there are healthy and unhealthy ways in which you can be a member of any one of them. There are healthy forms of Catholicism and unhealthy forms of Catholicism. There are unhealthy forms of Islam and healthy ones. The current Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, Francis, seems like a very open-minded and, at least for a Catholic, a fairly progressive person of faith. His predecessor, I don't think anyone could rationally describe as having been either open-minded or progressive in any meaningful way. But they were both not only Catholics, they're both popes. There's a lot of diversity within any of the religions that we talk about. There are hundreds of millions of Muslims that you will never hear about in the news because they are simply hardworking, moral, sane, peaceful people who are loving and devout. They're people of faith who are really good people. We should no more put all Muslims under the same heading of jihadist terrorists than we, our congregation, should be put under the heading of Christian identity or the KKK. Now, I love this quote from Mark Twain that we used as our wisdom lesson today, that it's not what religious people don't know that should worry us. It's what they're absolutely certain of that should scare us to death. All that being said, I want to be clear that problems are not always corrected by going to the opposite end of the spectrum. Religious certainty about things that cannot be seen, cannot be verified, cannot be tested, or in any way validated is really just a kind of idolatry, and all idols are slated for destruction. Certainty about purely theological claims is insane. There is no way to be certain about those things. However, that does not mean that all beliefs and teachings are of equal value. It doesn't mean that we can't know anything, that we can't learn anything, that we can't grow or improve. Yes, a sincere faith should question everything. You should be able to ask any question in any church. You should be able to examine any truth. But you shouldn't be afraid to step out of the shadows and act confidently about what you can know, what you do know is true. There are things that can be observed, that can be tested, that can be examined, and that can be determined to be true. I don't often suggest songs to Sean because he knows so much more about music than I do. But sometimes I listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of news podcasts, and some of them will include a song in between segments. And sometimes I'll hear one that just stops me in my tracks, and I stop right where I am, look it up, find it, and send it to Sean. And he's doing one of those songs today that I wish that we could include on our video, but I think we'd be breaking tons of laws if we do. Though I will risk repeating the verse that made me know that we absolutely had to use it in our services. It says, "Who are you to deny your fellow man his human rights? Nobody says that you have to agree, but you do have to let others be free. These are not opinions. I am right, and you are wrong. Your arguments are worthless, and your reasoning is flawed. Your mind can't be free when it's locked inside an ancient book." Now, when it comes to things about which no one can be certain, we can entertain all kinds of ideas in open, humble conversation. There's no room for dogmatism about religious claims that cannot be known. But we live in a world where a governor can decide to poison the water of an entire city in order to save a few $100s, killing a few people, lowering the IQs of thousands, and negatively affecting the mental and physical health of tens of thousands of people. There is no respectable way to be neutral on that point. These are things that we can know, and our faith can speak to social justice because justice is the visible form of love. You cannot say that you're spiritual and be indifferent or be neutral about things that are clearly evil and can be known to be evil. When the prejudices of the majority can keep women's pay less than men's, when society can have such a corrupt judicial system that only poor minorities are ever executed, when we fill our prisons with young people who were caught with a couple of ounces of marijuana, while we fill Caribbean luxury resorts with the bankers who manipulated the marketplace and brought the world to the brink of depression, then neutrality is something to be ashamed of, not to be defended. I believe that the church has historically been guilty of acting like they had absolute confidence about things that they simply couldn't know, but have also shown criminal indifference towards things that they not only know, but that they had to try hard to bury their heads in the sand to not realize. When it comes to speculative theology, let's try and show some humility. And it doesn't come easily to me, trust me. I mean, I know that people's theological thinking could be much improved if they would just pay more attention to what I say. But I recognize that it behooves all of us to maintain humility about what cannot be known. But when it comes to social justice, we've got to show courage. We can't act like we can be indifferent or neutral about those things. Maybe we shouldn't have put a cross up in this church, since our congregation tends to be more of an interfaith community than specifically Christian. But it is there, and I remember the day that Nancy Payton and I stood in the back of this building when we first bought it and discussed whether we should put one there or not. And I said to Nancy, the cross is a historical fact. And I think that it behooves us to be reminded that Jesus wasn't killed for being a moderate. Jesus wasn't killed because he healed people and told them to love each other. Nobody kills somebody like that. Jesus was killed for being prophetic, for challenging the marketplace, challenging the government's occupation of their land. If he was just Mr. Rogers in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, he would have lived to a ripe old age and died. The cross is a reminder that the middle of the road is really just for yellow stripes and dead possums, and I don't want to be either one of those.
You have been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Reverend Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more information.